Hi, and welcome to the Letter S podcast. My name is Joe Gross, and I'm joined by Anina Jasper Brody, who, like myself, experienced the loss of a parent at a young age. In this series, Anina and I will be sitting down with individuals from all ages and backgrounds, each having experienced the loss of a parent. Join us as we delve into their unique journeys, exploring how they've navigated challenges and found motivation to lead positive, meaningful lives. Together, we'll uncover inspiring stories and valuable insights that can enrich our own paths. I invite you to join us on our journey to spread awareness and hope to those seeking a community and happiness in their lives. Welcome back to yet another episode of the Letter S podcast. I'm joined here today, of course, with my co-host, Anina.
Hi, everyone.
And we're here with Liora today. How are you today, Liora?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here.
Just to give a little background on Liora. Liora is 21 years old from Riverdale, New York. Her father passed away when she was 18, and he was 55 at the time. Liora just graduated with honors from NYU, where she studied psychology and child and adolescent mental health studies. She plans to pursue a PhD in clinical psychology. Liora also loves to paint, tap dance, and journal in her free time. So I've never heard of so many people going into tap dance. So where did you find the way to pursuing that?
Yeah, so I used to do musical theater when I was a kid, and it was so much fun. My favorite part was definitely the dance. I love to tap dance, and I've continued to do that in my free time when I was in college, and I also got to take a tap class, so that was really fun. Definitely not connected to my pursuits in psychology. It's more of like a thing on the side, but something that definitely gives me a lot of meaning and joy.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Very cool. I used to tap dance also, but I wasn't good at it, so I stopped it at an early age.
Oh, really? Hidden talent.
Not a talent
Tap
at all.
dance.
For sure not a talent. So this podcast is called the Letter S podcast because everyone involved in this podcast has lost a parent at a young age. Changing the word parents to parent, the letter S symbolizing the plural. Throughout your experiences, what does the letter S mean to you? Can you share some stories about how the letter S has affected you?
Yeah, so the letter S implies or assumes that you have both parents, and so without it, it can kind of create a sense of this like vast emptiness, and it can be really unnatural to say like the phrase my parent as opposed to parents. So it was a bit of a transition to get used to that concept, because our language doesn't really have like a natural way of saying like, you know, like parent. And yeah, I guess that was just my experience.
And how was transitioning? You know, you lost your father when you were 18, which I lost my father when I was 8. Joe lost his father when he was 6. Mm-hmm. It's a little later in life. You've gone through some more experiences. What was it like making that change after all that time that you did have your father with you?
Yeah, so I think something I was really lucky to have was that like my dad was with me for pretty much my entire childhood. I lost him when I was 18, which, you know, is not super like old or anything. It's still very young, but I guess I was lucky in that losing my dad didn't necessarily shape my development, as in like I wasn't growing up like with that, but it did shape like who I would become later on. I think that losing my dad at 18 meant that I had to kind of mature a little bit faster. I kind of like dropped that teenage angst phase immediately and learned to take more care of my mom, learned to watch over my brother more, and become a sort of pillar of my home. So I think like that was sort of right in that transition towards adulthood, or in psychology as we call it, emerging adulthood, where it's a phase where it's not exactly adulthood, but you're starting to like transition into some adult responsibilities, not all but some. And it meant that I started taking on some things a little bit earlier than maybe other people did.
Are you the oldest?
I'm actually the youngest,
Okay.
but since my brother has autism and I kind of started developing past him at a certain point, I kind of took on the older sister role in the family.
what was that like in general, and what was that like in your role after your father passed away?
Yeah. So it meant that I always looked out for my brother. A lot of times I like to hold his hand when we're going places and make sure that he's happy and comfortable. And I started taking on that role a lot more of that big sister, and sometimes even more of a parental role after my dad passed. Because without my dad, like, my brother didn't really have, like, both, like, my parents used to play the role of, like, good cop, bad cop sometimes with him. And sometimes there was just sort of, like, one or both of those roles, like, missing every now and then. So I'd often, like, take on that role more of helping parent him.
Has it been difficult to raise also your brother, knowing that he has autism and that's not the easiest to, bring up?
Yeah, so on the most part, it's actually been great. It's rarely actually difficult. It can be, like, difficult to talk about because not a lot of people know about autism, and, like, often, like, people will make assumptions. I had a professor once who, like, assumed that I was neglected when I was a kid. I was not, because that's kind of like a stereotype that people have. Sometimes bears some truth, but not with most people, I believe. So that can be kind of difficult. But with my brother, I think I get a lot of joy from seeing him grow and seeing the way that he changes over time and becomes more social and, yeah, just becomes a better brother.
Can you tell us a little about who your father was, some of the characteristics he had, maybe share some stories about him so Joe and I and everyone listening can get a better sense of who we're going to be speaking about?
Yeah, so one of the top characteristics about my dad that I think a lot of people that remember him will agree on was that he was very selfless, and he loved to live in the moment while he still had time. And he was always looking out for others, always lending a helping hand, always trying to help in whatever way he could. And he was just very loving and very devoted to Judaism.
And what do you think? Obviously, I'm sure you take a lot from him, but if you could share some things from him that you instill in your life, what are those things?
Definitely all the above. I think that everything my dad taught me, like, shapes who I aspire to be. I aspire to be selfless. I aspire to help others. And I aspire to practice Judaism with love. Not just, like, to practice, but to enjoy and gain meaning from my practice.
What was the process like that your father passed away? And if you're able to go through any of how that happened and how it went down and any stories we'd love to hear.
Yeah, so it was definitely very sudden, completely unexpected. My dad passed away from a heart attack at the age of 55. With basically, there was, like, no warning, and it was really, really shocking, and my family didn't know what to do at first. We had to just suddenly go through, like, the mourning process, the funeral, the burial, and in Judaism, I think compared to some other traditions, it goes really fast, which has its pros and its cons. The pro is that, like, you come together with the community right away. And we connected with others through the Shiva process, through the funeral and the burial, and that was really meaningful for me. But sometimes also the con is it could be really overwhelming. And while you don't really have time to, like, process the loss, you're just suddenly jumping into all these, like, kinds of ceremonies. But the Shiva process was very, very helpful for me.
What was the most special part of that Shiva process for you?
I think the most special part was sharing and hearing stories of my dad, some of the best memories that his friends and family have. One of his friends was sharing how there were these different selfless things my dad would do in their friendship, where, for example, my dad and him would walk home from shul. And my dad lived not exactly close to his friend, and he would go out of his way to walk his friend home, and just be able to talk with him. And then he would come home and share, like, all the wonderful things he talked about. Yeah.
That's great.
I think it's interesting because other people we've spoken to have spoken about the religious process of mourning and said things like, oh, it's good because when you don't have Shiva and when you don't have a funeral right away, it's hard. You go back to work. Like, I think a lot of people who aren't Jewish just go back to work after the person died or don't take a week off. And I think that in Judaism, I mean, I don't remember so much about my Shiva experience because I was so little. I just remember like having fun and hanging out with friends. But I can't imagine really what it would be like if I went back to school after that. I just think it's very interesting how everyone has a different relationship with that week. And it's not just that week, it obviously goes beyond.
Yeah. For me, it was especially like difficult because I was in school at the time and I didn't know what to do. Like, I started reaching out to my professors and asking them like for extensions or for even like to like finish the semester later. But all of them were so kind and so understanding. And I ended up only taking 2 weeks off, which looking back feels kind of insane. And then I went right back and finished my first year of college, which was really hard, but with all that support, it really helped.
So this happened during college, the beginning of college?
My first year.
Before college, did you go to seminary?
No, I didn't. Jumped right in.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting point to hear because I'm so used to hearing people go straight from high school, of course, and our, organizations are our different communities that people go straight to seminary, but you felt like you were comfortable, being able to go to the college, the outside world from our bubble in a very comfortable way. So was it a little bit difficult to do that with, your father passing at the beginning and being able to do that transition? Was that tough?
Yeah, I think it was especially tough because my first year of college was right in the thick of COVID. And so I spent my entire freshman year home, which I am grateful for because I got to like actually spend a lot more time with my dad than usual. And that was great. But it meant that the transition to college in my second year, like that first in-person year for me, was a much bigger transition than it would have been. And so it was really hard just adjusting. And something I did to kind of cope with that, my dad wore a kippah, and he wore pretty much the same one most of the time, and I have that same kippah that he wore, and that I know he wore before he passed. And I used to bring it with me everywhere I went, as like taking a piece of him where I went, and that was really nice in the beginning. But eventually it actually became more bitter and sad because I suddenly looked at it and I was like, oh, my dad passed. But overall, I got so much support from my friends, and I went immediately to my Hillel. I actually started there even during COVID, online, which was fun, but a little different. But it meant that when I actually transitioned in person, I had some of those supports already there.
And what was that like with the people that didn't know? You started a whole new journey, a whole new place. What was it like telling those people that your father passed away? How did they react? And how did it feel for you to tell them?
For some people, it was a little bit awkward. Some people would be like, oh, hi, how are you? I'm like, oh, my dad just passed, so I'm not doing great.
How are you doing?
Yeah. So those times were sometimes difficult and weird, but on the most part, a lot of my friends knew right away. Because I had already connected with them before my dad passed. So I already knew my roommate before. And a lot of my college friends attended my Shiva. It was on Zoom, so not exactly not in person, but
Would you say non-religious friends came? Like non-Jewish
Yes.
friends came?
Yeah.
And how did they find the process?
I did explain it to them a little bit before, so I guess they were kind of prepared. But it was probably a little strange for them, just seeing all these people knowing what to do. But what was nice about the fact it was on Zoom was it just felt more like, conversations that you'd have online during COVID, less like the whole Shiva tradition. So it wasn't as much for them to adjust to. But it was funny watching them in there.
I guess you kind of answered this question, but if you could speak a little bit more about the Shiva Zoom experience.
Yeah.
Or anything related to that too, because, Yisker came on at some point and, after a year, Yard Site, if anything, religiously came up to mind, they want to share.
Yeah. So starting with the Shiva process, it was definitely a funny one, especially for my family. My mom and I, we got, those chairs that you sit on, the low ones, but nothing was traditional other than that with the Shiva process. So we were, using my computer, we signed on, and suddenly, everyone was just popping up in their little bubbles. And It was overwhelming in its own way, but I think actually it was less overwhelming than the average Shiva process, where you suddenly have like all these people in your home. That was something I was worried about adjusting to. But it was actually pretty nice over Zoom. It was just me and my mom. We got to hold hands and just sit there, and whenever like we needed a break, we would just sign off, and then we were just alone in the home when actually got some quiet, which was nice. But we did have some interesting moments during the Shiva. Something that I actually learned is somewhat universal, is that there's always that random person that starts asking you like about the graphic details of how your parent passed or something, or just asks like some uncomfortable kinds of questions. I'm not sure if you guys have experienced that too, but I've heard from friends that they've experienced it. But overall, the experience was really, really meaningful and very helpful for my processing and my coping. It was really beautiful to just hear about, again, like all those memories of my dad, and also to hear from different family members about like their experiences, and all the support that I got.
And what about other religious experiences that you've had, like Yisker, Yurtzeit? Can you speak a little bit about those also?
Yeah, absolutely. So at first, saying Kaddish was pretty difficult. And I think also, I'm not sure if like this is a thing, but I think in some Orthodox circles, it's not as much of a tradition for women to say Kaddish. So some people didn't expect me to, which was kind of hard when I went to school. But overall, saying Kaddish was really helpful for me in the end, because it felt like a way for the community to come and support. Just hearing people's voices, like singing like those repetitions, well, not exactly singing, chanting those repetitions, but yeah, it was really helpful for me. And Yizkor is also a really beautiful tradition, I think. Just being able to like say like words and remember my dad. Like I think during Yizkor I take time just to remember while I'm saying the words, and also being able to pray for others is beautiful.
Getting back to Kaddish, did your brother happen to say Kaddish as well? Is it more difficult for him, or did you take upon that role to have to say Kaddish throughout the year?
Yeah, I've taken on the role definitely more. We never made my brother say anything. He wouldn't really understand it, and I'm not sure like he'd even be able to like say the words because it's a little bit difficult. But yeah, it was more me and my mom.
Was he able to understand what was going on when your father passed away, and did you have to then explain everything to him with your mother?
That's a really good question, actually. Yeah, my brother, I don't know if he'll ever fully grasp it. He often still asks, like, where's daddy? And, well, I'll say, like, oh, like, where is he? And he'll say, like, in heaven or something. But I'm not sure if he understands heaven as a concept, because it's it's kind of, like, not at an, you know, like a solid place on earth. So I'm not sure he'll ever fully understand. But, I was able to tell that he was experiencing really heavy sadness when my dad passed. Sometimes actually like he would just be like really quiet and kind of just like sitting on his bed, and my mom would be like, Eitan, like what are you feeling? And he'd actually say that he was feeling sad. So I think he recognized that my dad wasn't going to be coming back anytime soon. But it was still difficult for him to grasp.
What were those moments like for you when he said, where's he? And I mean, I watched a TV show a while ago of this woman who lost her husband in like a house fire, and then she got older and got dementia, and I'm obviously not comparing the situations, but
No.
she forgot that he died, or she didn't really understand, and she had triplets, and she would always say, his name was Jack, where's Jack? And they would always have to re-explain that he passed away. So it kind of sounds a little similar, those questions of where is he, how is that for you, how was that for you?
Yeah, it can be really difficult, and it was hard at first, especially. It's kind of sad, but I think now I've kind of learned to settle with it and be able to like give him like an answer, like, you know, like daddy passed away, or I might actually say like daddy's in heaven or something. And it's weird because like, do I know where he is? Not exactly, because we don't really know anything about what happens after you pass.
Do you have someone, I mean, you're going into psychology, so that's something, but before I understand he passed away suddenly, but do you have someone that you talk to, a mentor, a psychologist, about how you're feeling?
Or I guess a little bit more on that is, throughout the process of explaining it to your brother and going through yourself with your mother as well, did that kind of influence you to go into the psychology route?
Oh,
Yeah.
Good
So
question.
to answer the first question, so many people. I have so much support, thank God. Firstly, I have a psychologist who I talk to, and I was lucky to already be seeing her before my dad passed, long before, when I was in high school. And she's been such an incredible support for me. And so have been my friends, my family. My closest friends, were with me, right when my dad passed. So that was really, really helpful for me. And the second question, I think that I already was interested in psychology, but I didn't know exactly what I would be doing. And I didn't know that I'd be doing, clinical psychology. That was not really, in my, picture of, what I wanted to do. But I think that going through loss made me realize that I really want to help people going through similar things. I want to help people as they suffer different adverse events and learn how to improve their lives. And I think that going through the loss has also made me more empathetic towards those kinds of situations. So I think it definitely increased my interest.
That's a little bit of the reason why we do this podcast. We want to be able to help and share stories to everyone that can definitely use it throughout the challenges in their life and improve their lives too. And would you say that something like this in your life has improved your life in some way or got you over some humps that have come along the way as well over the last few years?
Yeah. I think definitely That's it's such a big question.
No worries.
But yeah, I think that I've learned to become again more empathetic towards others, and being able to seek support from others and lend support has been a huge part of the processing. And also going through the psychology program, being able to learn about different lessons that actually help with coping. So, for example, I learned that there's not really such thing as those 5 stages of grief, and I think that that's actually a really important lesson.
Yeah.
Because having this idea that there are 5 very specific stages of grief can kind of create a model for people where it's oh, so I should be going through this now. But no, there's no one way to process. There's no one way to cope. And I think how you cope is how you cope. So you have nothing to apologize for. And that's a really important lesson for me. So that's really helped me as I cope. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to remember. I think that, as you said, people assume this happens and then this happens and then this happens. And then if it's not in that order and it's not that exact way, people freak out. Why am I different? Why am I experiencing this a different way? But that's not true. Everyone goes through it differently. And I think also one of the goals of the podcast is to have many different people on to make it known to the people that are listening and to the people that are on the podcast that you're normal, and just because you're not experiencing it just the way someone else is experiencing it doesn't mean you're off.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's very, very important.
Yeah. I think that one of the biggest things that people worry about that they're not experiencing is that they haven't cried. Or that they're not quote breaking down in any way. And that's so normal. That actually happened to me where for a while I was feeling really numb. And that was a really difficult period for me. It was sort of the year after my dad passed. I think that something that contributed to it was feelings of oh, I have to be strong for my mom. I have to be strong. And I didn't realize that a big part of being strong actually means being vulnerable and being in touch with your feelings. And that means sometimes being able to just I acknowledge oh, I feel really sad right now. And I think it was just really important to learn to actually kind of embrace all the emotions.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I think on the opposite side of the spectrum also, it's okay to cry and it's good to cry. And also I think that it's good to laugh and you're allowed to laugh. And I know that I've had friends who unfortunately have lost parents or have had a close friend that lost a parent, and they go to the Shiva and they were laughing I'm so surprised. And I'm no, that's also normal. So I think that any emotion, as I said before, any emotion is normal and valid.
When you were realizing those strong emotions that you had and kind of embracing it after going through that, did you go through a different experience when relating all of this to God and your Judaism, and if you had any emotions towards Hashem at that time?
also because you mentioned that your dad was such a believer in God and just loved Judaism. So just add it.
Yeah, that's actually a good question because I was in Israel when I had this, like, I guess sometimes we call it like a big cry. Something sort of just like instigated like this like breakdown I had, and I didn't understand why it was happening. But suddenly I realized it was like the fact that I had all these emotions bottled up that I wasn't really accepting. And I actually started crying and I couldn't stop. And thankfully, I had people supporting me there, actually like the people who were like leading my trip. And they started like telling me like, oh, like, you know, like you just have to like learn to be in touch with these things. And we just had this really helpful conversation. And I still like, you know, think about it all the time. And I think that it was special that I was in Israel at this time because it kind of felt like, oh, like I actually felt more connected to my dad in the place that he loved. And I learned like over time to connect more to God. I think at first I had like feelings of like sometimes anger. It was more feelings actually of like disbelief and lack of connection, because I started wondering, like, you know, like, why do these things happen? Why do the good die young, you know? So I felt really, really disconnected from God for a while. But I learned partly because of, like, these Jewish traditions that come when you're in mourning. I learned to actually not just believe in God, but to believe in the Jewish people, to connect more with the community and seek support from them.
Wow, that's unbelievable. And every time you go to Israel, do you feel that connection towards God in that way, and also to your father? Because you mentioned, you know, he loved Israel. I love Israel too.
Me too. I was just there.
But do you feel that some sort of strong connection when you go there?
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually never went with my dad, but he was always like really, really excited when I went. I've been a few times now. And one time when I went, I have this like specific memory of him. Like he was helping me like learn a Torah reading for like I was going to be at the Kotel, and it was a whole thing. And I was really excited about it. So was he, and he was just checking in with me, and he was just so excited to hear about what my experience was when I was there. And he, because of the time difference, he had to be up at like 5 a.m. to help me. He actually didn't have to. He decided to. And that was really, really nice. Again, like a selfless act he did to help me like with my practice of Judaism. So yeah, when I go there, I often think of him.
Can you talk a little bit about your cemetery experience when you go to the cemetery, how often, what it's like for you if you do? Any things there that help you feel more connected? Because I know everyone has a different relationship with the cemetery.
Yeah, so I've actually only been twice, I think now. First for the burial and then for the unveiling. And yeah, when I go, it obviously feels pretty strange, but I've learned actually to be less scared of cemeteries. Now they kind of bring a sense of peace to me, as opposed to like that kind of like Halloween core kind of feeling where it's like, oh, like, you know, like you have to hold your breath while you're passing by the cemetery. But now, yeah, like I actually gain a lot of meaning from visiting and seeing his headstone. And we chose to actually put like a little carving of a view of Jerusalem on it.
Nice. I've never heard that one
Me
before.
neither, yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, my mom and I had the idea, and we did that because, you know, my dad loved Israel, and we thought that that was just an important part of who he was. And so when I go, I think of him a lot, yeah.
Do you feel any desire to move to Israel because of your father's love for Israel and your love for Israel?
I was going to ask her that.
No way.
So I never thought about moving to Israel. I mean, I guess like sort of just like a thought, but nothing like actually like I would want to. But I often think about visiting for his memory.
It's interesting. My father also loved Israel. I think that if he was, someone asked me the other day, yesterday, do I ever think about what life would be like if he was still here? And I guess that's a question that you are more than welcome to answer also. But I was saying that I probably feel like he would want to live in Israel. And as I was just there, every time that, I don't remember so much at this point because it was a long time ago and I was very young, but I have one certain memory in Machane Yehuda walking down like Machane Yehuda with him, and it was his last trip, and him saying like, I don't know if I'm going to be here again, I don't know if I'm going to be at your bar mitzvah, like all these things. And I think Israel, just because we're on the topic of it, just brings out certain things and memories. I don't know, I feel like there's a special type of energy there. But I guess if you want to answer, do you ever think about what life would be like if your father was here? And yeah.
If he was still here, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I do actually a lot. Yeah. I think there's like this kind of emptiness without him there, and I feel like if he just like came back, he would just go back right into the rhythm that he was in before, and he would continue to do all the things that he loved. Like taking my brother to amusement parks and going to all like my like little school milestones. I thought about him like actually at my graduation at NYU that happened in May.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. And it was hard because you know, like I would have reserved him a seat. I would have like done all these things, gone out to dinner with him, and he would have like given me all like those celebratory like hugs and things like that. But I know that as I go through different milestones, I'll always be saving a seat for him in my mind. So he'll be there to celebrate with me, at least in here.
It's very nice.
Yeah, that's great.
How was it starting NYU? Because you mentioned he passed away during your first semester of college. So you started NYU and he was alive, and then you ended and he was not. How was that for you?
Yeah, it was really strange, actually. Yeah, like having him like be there just for the start.
Yeah. Because
I think about like, yeah, like what would he have thought of like how much I've grown and like how much I've changed since that year. I look back on that year, I'm like, oh, that wasn't like the best me. So I would have loved to have him like see me like in my senior year and as I graduate and as I know more what I want to do. And I think that he was proud of me, of course, like at first. As in like he was proud of me like as he saw me going into that and like as I'm figuring out who I am, what I want to do. But yeah, I just wish he could have seen.
Do you think about that a lot when you go through life and you're trying to be the best you can be? Do you think, oh, I want to be the best for my father and to show that I am a good influence and what kind of reputation I'm building for him? Do you ever think about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think my dad had all the best qualities that you could imagine. And so much of who he was, like, I aspire to be. So I often am trying to like do all of the good because I wish that I can just continue like his legacy, and be able to be a change maker, be able to like improve others' lives, the way that he would have wanted to.
That's an amazing idea.
Yeah, it's very important to always have that in mind. Because yeah, even though they're not here physically, they're very much, at least I believe, here spiritually.
Do you think that throughout your entire life that you've gone through challenges, I'm assuming, before your father passed away, because we all do through different stages in life, but also through your father passing away and over the last few years, do you think that those difficulties in your life has built character for you over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think growing up with my brother, like there were some hardships here and there, and there were some low points, but there were also these high points, and I learned to see like the positives. I learned to like gain joy even from like some difficult moments. That was something my dad always was able to do. He was always able to like take life to the limit, be able to like live in the moment, and evoke joy even during like hard times. So I learned to be able to do that. It's a really important skill to like build resilience and be able to use humor sometimes to cope, and be able to like
I agree with that. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, and just be able to smile through things, not like in a fake way, just be able to like figure out like, like what can I gain from this moment, even if it's a really difficult one. And another thing that I keep bringing up is that empathy, be able to like understand others' perspectives and sympathize with them, even if like it feels like, for example, like, like I never want to compare a loss. But, one time I had a friend approach me and she was like, oh, my dog passed away, but that probably means nothing to you. And I'm like, she said it in a much better way than that. But the point being, I was able to, like, empathize with her despite, like, the fact that they're very different kinds of losses. But I learned that, like, any loss is a loss. Any difficult time is a difficult time. And how you cope is how you cope. So Yeah, like I learned to be able to just be able to empathize.
I think that's a very important point that you bring up about, your friend's dog passing away. That challenges come to different people and they have different reactions to it. And it could mean so much to someone that they lost their dog in a similar way that you lost your father. Not that it's on the same level, but to that person personally, it could react to them in a different way and have that same reaction, emotion, feeling to it like you might have.
Right.
So I think that's very important that you bring that up and for people to hear that.
And also that you're able to say, yeah, like I lost my father, your friend lost their dog. Like, I don't know if I heard that, if I would be like, that's ridiculous. Like those two, and I love my dog, but still it's not comparable. No offense.
Sophie's listening.
Sophie is listening or sleeping, who knows. But like, I just think that good for you. And I'm envious of that. And maybe I can learn from you to really think, like, a loss is a loss. If it's a bird, if it's a dog, if it's a parent, if it's an ant, like the bug, like it's a loss is a loss. I think it's very important. So
yeah, ants are very important in this world.
Right.
I agree.
For sure. Hashem's creation.
And I think it's also important when you brought up smiling is, a big part of making other people happy, showing that you care and being empathetic. It's very important to have that smile, even though someone might think it's so cliche and something small. It really does go a long way, just putting a smile on your face for other people to see.
Yeah, and it makes a big difference for yourself too. There's actually studies that show if you actually just smile, it brightens your day a bit more.
Yeah.
Wow.
We'll try it out.
Should I smile right now for the camera?
All right. Are there any books or resources that you've turned to that you feel people listening should know about that have made a difference for you?
Yeah, so there's not actually specific books that I've read like for pleasure reading, but I've learned a lot from like books on like trauma from like my psychology classes. Those might be a difficult read for people, especially going through losses.
Yeah.
But learning about like how people cope with different adverse experiences has been really helpful for me, especially like that like idea that there's no one way to cope, and how like different struggles like influence you based on when they happen. That like, for example, if I lost my dad when I was younger, it would have been very different for me than when I was older, and how it shapes my development. So I think reading about those experiences has been really helpful for me. And I think also different activities have been really great, like journaling and like stress painting and things like that. I learned to do things like paint by number. And it sounds like ridiculous and like simple, but it's also really fun to do. And I think being able to just do something creative and productive at the same time can be really beautiful. But journaling especially has been great. I've been using journaling actually to get in touch with my emotions more. Something I did when I was in college was I took this like little Penco journal, and I would just before every class just write on a page about everything that was going through my head, everything I was feeling. And it would be a way for me to just like not only get in touch with my emotions and what I was feeling in that moment, but to also just be able to, like, when I finish after 3 minutes, move on to class and be completely focused because it's all out.
You're not the first person that said that. I'm sure you're not going to be the last, but it's very important.
Yeah, and that's a lot of amazing advice you've given us now and also throughout this entire conversation we've had, and we really appreciate you coming today. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Liora, for coming on the podcast.
But if there's one piece of advice you can leave our listeners, and of course, Anina and I today left with, what is the biggest piece of advice you can give us?
Yeah, I think always to learn to be in touch with your emotions and embrace all of them, no matter how difficult it is. I think being able to talk to others about how we feel, like whatever that support is, like whether it's a clinical psychologist, whether it's a friend, a family member, your dog, I think it's so important to reflect and to recognize what you're feeling. And that has been really helpful in my journey.
That's amazing.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Liora, for coming and speaking on this podcast. It's an honor to hear from you, and I'm sure that many people here will learn from you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again so much for listening to another episode of the Letter S podcast, inspiring one life at a time. Please make sure to check out our Instagram at theletterspodcast_. If you have any questions or interested in hopping on a mic with us, feel free to email us at theletterspodcast@gmail.com. And as always, stay in touch.